This evening's talk is going to be far more focused on what's going on with food, or what people think of as food out there. It's probably why it's not so full, because I don't think most people want to know this kind of stuff. It becomes very uncomfortable to eat when you know what you're eating isn't food. So I've got quite a lot of slides. I've got way too many slides to go through tonight. But there's just, I cherry pick stuff. There's so much research and information, and it goes on and on and on. I spent about 8 hours today just collating it all and putting it together into slideshows. So let's see how quickly we can move through it. So I call it unreal food. Just playing on the idea that really today what most people consider food in supermarkets really isn't food. It's some kind of strange aberration. And because it's kind of crept in over the last 80 years, people haven't noticed, so they still think it's the same stuff. So we'll go through exactly why it's different and where you can get real stuff. So I'm going to start the talk off establishing the problem, going through various aspects from farming to factory farming to poisons in food and chemicals, and then we'll move into some solutions at the end.
Yeah, it's a big subject.
It's a big subject, huge, huge subject. So let's get going. Some of you may have seen some of these stats before. I do use them in some of my other talks. We have a situation where farming today has gone through a massive change since World War II. That was the beginning of chemical agriculture. Before that, pretty much everything was organically grown. People had to use compost and fertilizer because that's how food would be healthy. And then chemicals came along and kind of tricked plants into looking good. And decades and decades and decades of using chemical farming has some results. So on this slide you'll see some of the results. In 1997, 26 apples contain the same iron nutrition as one apple in 1914.
Wow.
So a loss of minerals is occurring in the soil. And that's obvious because in commercial agriculture they generally only use 3 nutrients for plants, magnesium, potassium, nitrogen and phosphorus. So the whole suite of minerals and trace minerals eventually gets leached out of the soil because they aren't using compost. And compost is the old traditional way of making sure your soils contain a host of different nutrients and minerals. Between 1940 and 1991, trace levels of minerals in fruit and veg fell by over 76%. So we've seen a massive decline in nutrient density in food. And this is a big reason why people today eat fruits and vegetables and other foods and don't feel full. They're still hungry. Because it's the mineral concentration in the food that turns off the hunger switch. That's what makes your body go, ha, got what I needed, don't need to eat anymore. So I always say that in a sense, the older you are at the moment, the more likely you are to be healthier. Because when you were growing up, you were likely eating all organic food. Whereas the younger you are at the moment, the more likely you are to have disease symptoms because you were brought up in a time where there were more chemicals present and the food was on a downward slide. I just see what's happening in the food system, and I think kids today, they just have radical obstacles to overcome. Being indoctrinated into a food society that we have at the moment with no real understanding through schools or through media that things are not as they appear to be. So the use of synthetic pesticides has increased more than 33-fold in the last 50 years. That's an enormous number. So massive amounts of poisons, all sorts of different poisons being used on the food. And interestingly enough, even though it's increased to such a degree, the crops being lost to pests are higher now than ever before. So the chemicals aren't doing what they're supposed to even be doing, which is to keep the pests off the crops. So, a review of all of this seriously needs to be done. I found a few stats on South Africa, which is near impossible. But in South Africa, if you drive through any of the farming areas, you'll notice out of crop season, it looks like deserts. It's just kilometers and kilometers of soil with almost nothing growing on it. And this is because over many, many years of planting the same crops and using the same chemicals, you get natural vegetation being destroyed, and that means all the topsoil washes off into the rivers and out into the oceans. So in South Africa, we're looking at an estimated 300 to 400 million tons being lost annually. I can't even comprehend that figure, the enormity of it. That's 3 tons for each hectare of land, of topsoil annually being washed off. So we're in a situation where farming doesn't change in this country within the next 10 years, maybe even sooner. There's going to be radical food shortages. Because once the soil gets to a certain level of nutrient loss, the bacteria can no longer survive, and you basically then end up with what's known as dead soil. It's classified as a desert. And when that happens, it doesn't matter how many chemicals you throw on the plants, they literally cannot survive. So major change needs to happen. One of the things often people tell me is, yes, so organic food sounds like a good idea, but farmers today are so heavily reliant on chemicals. They're sold this idea that chemical farming produces more yields, that it's cheaper to do that organic farming. And fascinatingly, a study came out a few years ago which completely disproved all of this stuff in America. So I'm going to show you a few of those. It was called the Rodale Institute Farming System Trial. 30 years of researching the difference between organic agriculture and non-organic or chemical agriculture. And just to show you some of these graphs, yields were pretty much the same, whether it was organic or conventional. So this whole idea that organic farmers have less yield is ridiculous. They have the same yields, slightly higher for organic farming. Where it gets very interesting is, for the farmer, their profit margin on organic food is almost 3 times conventional food. This is because people are willing to pay extra for real food. More and more people are learning today that the conventionally grown stuff is completely nutrient deficient. So they're willing to spend extra money for it. And I'm going to show you a few slides later to show you exactly why you should be happy spending lots more money on organic food. What else? We've got energy inputs, and the amount of energy they have to put in. Much lower on organic agriculture, so less fuel consumption, less energy inputs. And then greenhouse gases, much lower on organic farming. Again, this is primarily due to the lack of chemicals used. So, I don't see any downside there. This is all positive stuff coming out for organic farming. Conventional systems emit nearly 40% more greenhouse gases. Organic systems use 45% less energy than conventional systems. So organic agriculture literally has the potential to secure a global food supply with reduced environmental impact. So, still mainstream media regularly comes out with articles going, organic, we can never feed the world with organic, we need to use chemical stuff, we need to use GMOs, and that's just the furthest thing from the truth. But, mainstream media today is very much controlled by the same companies that control food supply. So you tend not to hear the truth about food through those aisles. You need to come to talks like this to hear about it. So that's kind of food farming on that level. If we look at what's going on with factory farming, it's pretty dismal. And here we do have some stats from South Africa. South Africans eat about 2.5 million chickens a day. Radical as that as a number. 26 million chickens confined to battery cages, which have an allotted space about 450 square centimeters. So it's an A4 page in square. So they live their whole life, they short little lives in that kind of space before they're slaughtered. So very, very big. If you ever drive past the N7 or quite a few of the highways, you'll see the battery farms that look like long, square, nondescript buildings where the chickens live permanently and never go outside. Levels of hormones and antibiotics poured into cattle feed are actually unknown in South Africa. Beef in South Africa is mostly produced in feedlots or factory farms. When they have that fancy label that says grain-fed, it's really another way of saying feedlot or chemically produced. So companies will always use catchphrases to try and trick people into thinking their stuff is better than anything else. So when you see grain-fed on something, bells should ring, you go, oh, okay, that's factory farm stuff. Pigs in South Africa are largely the worst treated of all commercially farmed animals. 60,000 pregnant sows in South Africa are kept in stalls where they cannot move around or stand up straight. So it's a huge issue, and the problem is getting worse because you now have a situation where diets like Banting are recommending people eat huge amounts of animal foods, and none of those people are consuming high quality animal foods. They're just getting the cheapest stuff they can find. So where we thought we were actually improving in terms of less cruelty, it's just going up and up every day. These can sometimes be a bit obscure for people who are like, oh, it's animals lot. But then when you get into what happens when you eat that food, it's a different story altogether. It gets a little bit personal. Bovine growth hormone is a genetically modified hormone that gets pumped into animals in feedlots. It's been banned in a number of countries, over 100, and basically increases the rate of mastitis in the cows, leading to an increased use of antibiotics. So this is why feedlot products like dairies are always very rich in antibiotics, and obviously the meat itself too, because the cows have got their antibiotics in them. 600,000 dairy cows in South Africa and around 2,000 farms, that's estimated of half the farms in the country, still use this growth hormone, even though it's been banned in over 100 countries worldwide. So, being aware of your source is, there's no other option. If you want to keep yourself safe and healthy, you have to know where your food's coming from. This particular hormone has been linked to increased rates of colon, breast, and prostate cancer. So direct links have been, reached for a lot of these chemicals that are being used today. This is why you've got to make sure that you're getting truly grass-fed stuff, truly organic stuff. That's the only way to be safe from these kind of chemicals. One of the things that's really surprised me in South Africa over the years is how little people know about genetically modified food. It's almost as though South Africans are completely oblivious to it. And it's amazing because this country is one of the top farming countries for GMOs on the planet. We're often called the dumping ground of the biotech industry. We have, I think we're in the top 5, maybe even the second highest in terms of GMO crops grown. For some reason our government just loves planting this stuff. Pretty much all corn at the moment in South Africa is genetically modified, and a large percentage of soybeans. Now, corn particularly is scary because most of the population of this country eats corn on a daily basis. So it's very, very scary to see what's happening with the health of the population, but I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think in the next few years there are going to be epidemics like we can't even imagine. So let me step back a bit. What's the story with GMOs? Why, do I, recommend people stay away from them? Well, I've got a few points which I'll mention. Firstly, what are they? They're basically organisms created by merging the DNA from one species to another species. So you can take fish genes and mix them with corn genes, and then you get particular traits from the fish passing on to corn. So that's called transgenic. It's creating like a whole new species of plant animal, which is very strange and it's never been seen on our planet. There's normally always a viral component because they use viruses to crack the genetic code of the plant in order to insert the new genes. So one of the challenges is that you do consume viruses when you consume that food. So these kind of foods cannot be produced in natural environments through crossbreeding. They are completely new expressions of genes in our environment. Pesticides used on GMOs cannot be washed off. They're absorbed into the crops. So people who think they can just rinse the stuff under the tap, it's not going to have any effect whatsoever. BT crops, which is a type of GMO crop, actually has the insecticide present in every gene of the plant. So in BT corn, every cell of that corn or that milli is pesticide. It's actually been reclassified now from food to pesticide, because the whole thing, leaves, the stalks, the whole thing is a pesticide. So when a bug eats it, it dies from eating the corn. Now people are eating this all the time, and you've got to ask yourself, how is that working out? So GMOs have led to a massive increase in toxic agricultural chemical use. So you'd find that a bit strange because they sell it saying that use our stuff, you'd use less poisons, but in actual fact the very opposite is happening. You're finding massive resistance to Roundup and herbicides happening. So more and more of the stuff is being used every year. GMOs and increased pesticide use are a major factor in increasing death rates of honeybees, butterflies, and bird populations. Some of you may be aware that there's a massive honeybee collapse worldwide. Western Cape is only just starting to be hit by it. We're looking at shortages of honey within the next year or so. Massive crop failures, and there's a huge amount of research that's linking this straight to pesticides, particularly in neonicotinoid pesticides. They basically cause havoc within the beehives, and the beehives have to be destroyed. Doesn't sound good. Interestingly, the US Food and Drug Administration does not require independent safety studies of genetically modified foods. So the only people saying the stuff is safe are the chemical companies producing it. Anyone think there's a conflict of interest there? So when you see all the newspaper headlines and the stories saying GMO is safe, that's literally coming from the same company that manufactures it and sells it. Wow. And people still think there's no problem there. Long-term safety studies exist on either safety or, well, no long-term studies, I'm sorry to say, exist because they're really not allowed to be done. Funding gets pulled if people try and do safety studies on this. Labs get disbanded, so nothing really exists. As far as I'm aware, there's only one that's been done recently that shows that there's a transference of foreign DNA into human gut bacteria. So the organisms that live in our digestive system actually change genetics from eating genetically modified food. Now we have no idea what this means or what it's going to do. It's a total experiment currently. What has been seen through animal studies is there are links to allergies, gut-related conditions, autism, autoimmune diseases, infertility, birth defects, obesity, cancers, and other illnesses. So animal studies have been done and conclusively shown the danger of consuming GMOs. And I think on that alone, it's worth exercising a bit of caution and maybe just not consuming it until they've categorically proven it's safe, which is likely never going to happen. For this reason, Monsanto Corporation controls 90% of all genetically engineered seed in the world. This is the rated most evil company on the planet. They have been banned or restricted in over 60 countries worldwide. Many European countries have literally burnt GMO crops out of their countries and not allowing them to grow there. So there's got to be a little bit of evidence to allow a whole country to go, we're not growing this stuff. The biggest country is obviously America. One of the things that's, for me, the most scary about GMO crops is that the pollen can travel for miles by wind or by pollinating animals, which basically means that those genes can infect other plants' genes. So we're really in an experiment here where there's contamination of natural species. And unchecked, this could literally lead to an extinction of natural species. I mean, just the consequences are staggering if we get into thinking about it. And one of the insane things that happens in America is people will have a farm growing, organic or natural mealies, and then there will be pollen or beehives nearby that will cross-pollinate with their corn, and then genetic companies will come, they'll take samples from organic farmers' crops, they'll test it, they'll find the genetic code for their corn, they'll take the farmer to court and sue him out of business for stealing their genetic code. This is what actually happens, I kid you not. It's absolutely insane out there. There are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of films and research stuff you can look into it. There's two sources over there, gmoawareness.com and gmoevidence.com. So if you do want to get into educating yourself a little bit more, have a look at those. On that site, movies to watch and GMOs, I think I counted about 30 different movies that you can see on this topic. So it has been widely studied and researched, and it's just something you have to educate yourself about, because in South Africa we're at a major disadvantage here. There's no labeling. People are just putting GMO foods in pretty much any processed food. Anything that has corn in it that isn't certified organic is likely genetically modified. Anything that has soya in it that's not certified organic is going to have GMOs in it. So just be very careful when you're shopping to check. If it's not certified organic and it has those two ingredients in, don't buy it, it's not worth it. So that's a pretty big part of the issue, but it gets even worse.